In this video, I'll go over the workflow that you need to be able to access your assignments, download them to your own computer, write your solutions, and submit them online. So let's get right into it. If you are enrolled on the MPAGS course, you can access the assignments directly through links sent via email. When you open this link, you should be greeted with a screen that looks like this. You may need to log in to GitHub first. Once you see this screen, you can click the green Accept This Assignment button, and it will create a repository with the template starter code for that assignment. Once this has been done, you'll see this page where you have a link to the assignment, and there is also a due date on when you need to submit this by. If you don't see this, you may need to refresh the page a few times before you get access to your link. If you are not enrolled on the MPAGS course, you can still take part in the assignments. You can find the link in the description to the first assignment. You can find the links to all of the required assignments in the MPAGS, HPC, and Julia GitHub organization. As you can see, the first assignment is already available. Once you've clicked on this link and you're logged into GitHub, you should be able to find this button, Use this template. You want to use this button instead of forking the repository or cloning this repository directly. If you click Use this repository, create in a new repository, give it a name, and click Create, you'll be at the same point as those students enrolled in MPAGS. Now everyone should be at this stage where they have access to their own repository. Before this stage though, you should make sure that you have all of the software set up on your computer, which we covered in the last video. To get access to this code locally, you can click the green code button, click on HTTPS, and copy this URL. You'll need this for GitHub Desktop, or you can also use this Open with GitHub Desktop button. I'll show you how to use GitHub Desktop directly. So once you've opened this application, go to File, Clone Repository, click on the URL tab and paste in the URL of your repository. You can also choose a folder in which to put this file. You can also use the first tab to find a repository locally if you've signed in with GitHub Desktop. Once you've clicked Clone this repository, you might be greeted with this pop-up message. What you want to do is select For My Own Purposes and hit Continue. So now that you have the code downloaded, you can click this Open in VS Code button or click on Repository and then Open in VS Code. Once it's open in VS Code, you want to click Yes, I trust the authors. Now the first thing that you want to do when you open this up is to change the Julia environment. If you have the Julia extension installed, this should pop up automatically. If not, you should be able to click this button on the blue strip at the bottom of the screen, which lets you change the environment. Here we want to change to HPC and Julia assignment 1 - whatever your username is. So now that we've selected this environment, we can open a new REPL. If you hold down Ctrl-Shift-P, and on Macs this is Command-Shift-P, you can search for Start REPL. And you want to click this option, which is Julia Start REPL. If this is the first time you've launched Julia, it might take a little bit of time to spin up. So now we're in the REPL, you want to press the close bracket key. And what you should see is assignment 1 in brackets. If you do not see assignment 1 in brackets, it's probably because you haven't changed your environment. To make sure that you're in the right environment, you can type activate space dot. Now what we have to do is make sure all of the packages are installed locally. So what we want to do is type in the command instantiate. What this does is go into our project file and make sure that we have everything installed that we need to run our project. If we go back to our GitHub repository, we can have a look at the README to see what the task is for this week. So if you scroll down on GitHub, you should be able to read through the README for each assignment to see what you actually need to do. One thing that you'll notice straight away is that we need to edit this source/collats.jl problem. It also gives us a link to another resource which describes what this problem is. So essentially we have to implement a function which counts the number in a sequence starting from some input, which will eventually end at 1. And the two rules that we have is if n is even, then divide it by 2. If n is odd, then we multiply by 3 and add 1. If we go back to our code and find collats.jl, so you can navigate all of the files by making sure you're in the Explorer, which is the top left icon on the left-hand tab, and then inside source, and then collats.jl. Here you'll find a docstring which describes what the function is supposed to do. but immediately you can see that the implementation is not completed. Another file that I want to draw your attention to is in the test folder and run tests. This file will run some code which will automatically check whether your inputs are correct or not. So what I'll do now is go back to this collapse length function and implement it correctly. So let's set up our development environment for this project. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that we have revise installed. So here you can either add revise to our local environment or you can add it into your global environment, which should be available everywhere. What I'll do is add this into our global environment so that we can use it everywhere. In the package manager REPL, we can type in activate to switch back to our global environment. In our global environment, we can add the package revise. Now if you press backspace, you should be able to go back into the normal REPL. If we type in using revise, and then include t source/collapse.jl, we should be able to interactively develop the code that's written within this file. So for example, if we wanted to find the collapse length of 10, we would type this. But at the moment this does nothing because our implementation is missing. So now I'll just very quickly implement the collapse length function. So here I've just provided an example implementation of what you could do. So you'll be writing this code for yourself, but some operators that you may need are the mod operator, which finds the remainder of a division. So for example, if you do 6 mod 3, you'll get 0 because 3 divides 6 evenly. But if you do 5 mod 3, you'll get a remainder of 2. If you use a number mod 2, you can find out whether it's even or odd by checking whether the remainder is 0 or 1. Another symbol that you may need is the div symbol. So you can access this by writing \div, pressing tab. This will do integer division. So usually if you do 5 divided by 2, you'll get 2.5. But if you do 5 div 2, you'll do integer division, which will round down by default. If you have correctly used revise to track this file, you should be able to directly call this function, which will now give the correct output. Obviously you don't know whether this is actually correct or not until you run the tests. If you open the run tests file, you should be able to see a green triangle next to the collapse length tests. If you click this triangle, you should be able to run all of the tests. It may take a second to start up, but should be much faster on subsequent runs. Once the tests have run, if they are correct, you should see a green tick mark here. You'll also see a test summary printed out here that says that 7 tests were run and all of them passed. If you also go to the test tube icon on the left, you'll see a tests tab, which will show you which assignments have been run and which were correct. This will be quite deeply nested, but you can see only one set of tests have actually been run. You can click this button at the top, which will run all of the tests in the project. So if you noticed here, our implementation only passed the first test, but the other 2 tests have not passed. The reason why these other tests have not passed is because we are missing an implementation, and also we haven't restricted our methods to certain input types. So for example here, we may want to restrict our inputs to integers only. So now once we do that, we pass one more of the unit tests. I'll leave it to you to implement this next function to complete the assignment. Now that we've passed a few of the unit tests, we may want to push our changes online. So what we can do is go to the source control tab. We'll see that collapse.jl is a modified file. If we click on this, we can see how our function has changed. So we've removed a few lines and added a small part of the implementation. We can also see this view in GitHub Desktop. You'll notice the changes of all of the files on the left-hand side, and when you select them, you can see what the changes are. In order to actually submit this, what you want to do is perform a commit. If you haven't done this before, all you need to do is provide a small summary of what you've done in this change. So here I'm going to put the message as implemented collapse length. Again, you could also do this directly from VS Code by writing the message here. What you will have to do before you do this is stage these changes. write the message, and then update class length, and then click this blue button. Once you've done this in GitHub Desktop though, you just want to click this blue button here. You notice that VS Code found this update and provided you with the sync changes button. This button will do the same thing as the push origin button in GitHub Desktop. If we come here, there's no longer an option here. Once we've made those changes, we should be able to refresh our GitHub repository and find our original file, and you can see that our implementation is now online. So once you've finished your implementations and all of the unit tests pass, here, you should commit your code and push it into GitHub. Once you can see all of your code available on GitHub, that will be counted as your submission. When I'm marking submissions, I'll take the most recent version of your code and run the tests there to make sure that everything passes. Finally, if you're having issues with VS Code and you can't get the Test Explorer to work, another way in which you can run the code is directly through the REPL. If you press the close square bracket button, you should be able to write the word test, press enter, and it will run all of the unit tests through the REPL. This might take a little bit of time to run, but you'll get the same output as before. So here you can see that quite a few of the tests failed, but some of them passed, and you can see which tests passed and which ones did not. You'll also probably see quite a lot of output for why the tests failed here. And that's the end of this video. I'll keep the description updated with links to all of the assignments as they get released throughout the course.